The cursed Dybbuk box. Every family has a story they'd rather not tell, and ours begins with a mysterious wooden box. I had always been a skeptic of the supernatural, dismissing ghost stories and paranormal phenomena as tales for the gullible. However, my skepticism would soon be tested, and I would come face to face with the kind of terror that only exists in nightmares. It all started when my uncle, a collector of rare antiques, passed away unexpectedly. He left behind a treasure trove of oddities and artifacts, but one item stood out, an old wine cabinet, intricately carved with symbols that appeared to be Hebrew. Despite its dusty appearance, there was something about it that drew me in. I couldn't quite place my finger on what it was, but I felt an odd compulsion to take it home. As soon as I placed the box in my living room, strange things began to happen. At first, they were minor disturbances, doors creaking open, lights flickering, and cold drafts sweeping through the house. I dismissed these occurrences as the quirks of an old home. But the unease was undeniable, a sensation that grew stronger with each passing day. One night, as I lay in bed, I was jolted awake by a loud thud coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I crept down the hallway, the air heavy with anticipation. The room was dark, shadows dancing ominously across the walls. Suddenly, the box flew off the shelf with a violent force, crashing to the floor with a deafening clatter. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. As I approached the box, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. Inside, I found a collection of peculiar items, a lock of hair, a dried rose, and a small brass candlestick. But it was the smell that hit me hardest, a nauseating stench of rot and decay. Despite my fear, curiosity got the better of me. I began researching the origins of the box, uncovering a chilling legend about a Dybbuk, a malevolent spirit from Jewish folklore, said to haunt the living and wreak havoc upon their lives. The more I read, the more the stories aligned with my experiences. Unexplainable misfortunes plagued those who possessed the box, leading to madness, misery, and even death. Determined to rid myself of the cursed object, I reached out to rabbis, paranormal experts, anyone who might have an answer. Each one urged me to destroy it, warning of the dangers that lay within. But I hesitated, fearing that doing so might unleash something far worse. As the days turned into weeks, my life began to unravel. I lost my job, my friends grew distant, and I became a prisoner in my own home, tormented by the box's dark influence. Shadows stretched across the walls, whispering my name, and an icy chill lingered in every corner. Then came the nightmares. Horrific visions of twisted faces and blood-soaked hands clawing at me in the darkness. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the scream still echoing in my mind. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of terror. The breaking point came one stormy night. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in ghostly white light. I sat clutching a crucifix, desperate for protection. Suddenly, the box began to rattle violently, the lid creaking open. A shadowy figure emerged, its eyes glowing with malevolent fire. I screamed and stumbled backward, but the figure advanced, its whispering voice echoing in my mind. "You cannot escape," it hissed, sending shivers down my spine. The air grew thick with the smell of sulfur, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. Just as I thought I was done for, the power surged, and the lights flickered back on. The figure vanished, leaving the room eerily silent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew then that I had to find a way to break the curse, or I would be its next victim. But as I sat there, trembling and alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something even darker was lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The house was alive with a sinister energy, every corner shadowed by the malevolent presence of the Dybbuk. The key felt like a hot coal in my hand, its weight a constant reminder of the grim task ahead. As Sarah and I sat huddled in the kitchen, trying to catch our breath, the reality of our situation pressed down on us like a leaden shroud. "We need to act quickly," Sarah urged, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "The longer we wait, the stronger it becomes." I nodded, though dread gnawed at my insides. We had the key, but the ritual to banish the Dybbuk was a complicated one, and the slightest mistake could spell disaster. My uncle's journal had outlined the steps, but deciphering the cryptic instructions was no easy task. We gathered everything we needed: salt, sage, and candles, along with an old tome on Jewish mysticism that we hoped would provide additional guidance. The ritual required us to draw a protective circle and recite an incantation that would bind the Dybbuk once more, but there was a catch: the spirit had to be coaxed back into the box, a feat easier said than done. The basement seemed the logical place to perform the ritual, as it was where the Dybbuk had first manifested. But the thought of returning to that dark, confined space made my skin crawl. Before we could begin, a loud crash reverberated through the house, followed by a chilling howl that sent shivers down my spine. The Dybbuk was growing impatient, its fury palpable in the air. I steeled myself, pushing aside my fear as Sarah and I descended into the basement, each step echoing like a death knell. The room was darker than before, the shadows thick and oppressive. We arranged the candles in a circle, the flickering flames casting eerie shapes on the walls. As we sprinkled salt around the perimeter, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, unseen eyes following our every move. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the book to the page marked by a frayed ribbon. The incantation was written in Hebrew, its words unfamiliar and haunting. We began to chant, our voices barely a whisper in the suffocating silence. The air grew colder, a biting chill that cut through to the bone. As we recited the incantation, the shadows seemed to writhe and coil, a malevolent force gathering strength. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing the fear that threatened to consume me. Suddenly, the room was plunged into darkness as the candles were extinguished by an unseen force. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for the flashlight, its beam cutting through the blackness. The shadows retreated, but only for a moment. In the dim light, we saw it, a twisted form emerging from the shadows, its eyes glowing with unholy fire. The Dybbuk was here, a specter of pure malice, its presence suffocating. It moved toward us with deliberate, menacing steps, its form flickering like a broken image. Desperate, I held up the box, the key poised in my other hand. "Get back in," I shouted, though my voice wavered with fear. The Dybbuk paused, its eyes narrowing. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, a trace of humanity buried beneath its rage. But then it lunged, its form dissolving into a swirling mass of darkness that enveloped us. I staggered back, clutching the box as the shadows swirled around me, a vortex of nightmares. My mind reeled with images, faces twisted in agony, voices screaming in torment. I felt myself slipping, the world blurring into a cacophony of terror. But Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, clear and resolute. She continued the incantation, her words a lifeline in the storm. I focused on her voice, anchoring myself to reality as I forced the key into the lock, turning it with a resounding click. The box trembled, the air vibrating with an unholy energy. The Dybbuk shrieked, its form collapsing inward, drawn toward the box like a moth to flame. The shadows convulsed, swirling violently as the spirit fought against its confinement. With a final, deafening wail, the Dybbuk was sucked into the box, the lid slamming shut with a resounding thud. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive, as the darkness lifted, leaving us gasping in its wake. We sat there for a moment, too stunned to move. The room was still, the only sound our ragged breaths. Slowly, the reality of what we had done settled over us. We had trapped the Dybbuk, but the cost was yet to be revealed. As we climbed back upstairs, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had survived, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt normal. But the sense of unease lingered, a shadow that refused to lift. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I told myself it was just my imagination, the lingering effects of our ordeal. But as I drifted off to sleep, I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, drifting through the darkness, "You cannot escape." My eyes snapped open, heart racing as I scanned the room. Nothing. Just shadows dancing in the moonlight. Yet the feeling remained, a cold knot of fear twisting in my gut. I realized then that our battle with the Dybbuk was far from over. The true horror was still to come, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And deep down, I knew that whatever awaited us would be far worse than anything we had faced before. The days after my encounter with the Dybbuk were a haze of paranoia and exhaustion. Sleep was elusive, and every shadow seemed to harbor some lurking threat. Sarah stayed with me as we scoured my uncle's journal and the cryptic notes for any clues that could lead us to a permanent solution. We pored over every page, deciphering the archaic Hebrew texts, piecing together a story that was far more twisted and sinister than we had imagined. The box had not merely been a vessel for the Dybbuk, it was a carefully crafted prison, created by a long-dead Kabbalist who sought to contain the spirit for reasons that remained unclear. Late one night, as the wind howled outside, Sarah stumbled upon a section of the journal we had overlooked. It described a ritual more complex than the one we had attempted, a ceremony that could sever the Dybbuk's ties to our world and free it from its suffering. The instructions were precise and chilling in their complexity. The ritual would require a profound sacrifice, one that made my blood run cold. I realized then that the Dybbuk had been a prisoner, tormented by its entrapment, its rage fueled by centuries of anguish. And the box was more than a cage, it was a beacon, calling to those who might release it, promising vengeance and redemption in equal measure. But the most terrifying revelation was yet to come. As we read on, we discovered that the box was not just a prison but a fragment of a larger whole, part of a collection of artifacts designed to trap and control the most malevolent spirits. My uncle had gathered them, believing he could harness their power. It was his arrogance that had led to his untimely death, the Dybbuk exacting its revenge on the one who had imprisoned it. Determined to end this cycle of torment, Sarah and I prepared for the final ritual. We gathered the necessary items, more candles, salt, a ceremonial dagger, and a small vial of my blood, as the ritual demanded a part of the living to sever the Dybbuk's bonds. The night of the ritual was stormy, thunder rumbling ominously in the distance as rain lashed against the windows. We set up in the basement once more, the air charged with anticipation. As we began the ritual, the shadows deepened, and the temperature plummeted, a clear sign that the Dybbuk was aware of our intentions. We traced the circle on the floor, chanting the incantation in unison, our voices mingling with the howling wind. The candles flickered, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance in a macabre ballet. The Dybbuk's presence was palpable, a suffocating force that pressed against my very soul. As we continued, the room seemed to warp, the walls stretching and contracting in time with the rhythm of our words. The shadows coalesced, forming the same twisted figure I had seen in the attic. Its eyes burned with an intensity that was both malevolent and desperate. The ritual reached its climax, and I steeled myself for the final step. I took the ceremonial dagger, feeling its cold weight in my hand. I glanced at Sarah, who nodded, her eyes filled with determination and fear. I pressed the blade to my palm, gritting my teeth against the pain as I made the cut. My blood dripped onto the floor, mingling with the salt and forming a binding circle that glowed with an otherworldly light. The Dybbuk shrieked, its form unraveling in a whirlwind of shadows and despair. The air crackled with energy as the box shook violently, the lid rattling as if it might burst open. But instead, the shadows were drawn inward, spiraling toward the mirror, the true heart of the Dybbuk's power. In a final, desperate lunge, the Dybbuk reached for me, its clawed hand passing through the air mere inches from my face. But the mirror held, its surface absorbing the spirit, trapping it within its own reflection. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the ritual completed. The box lay still, its power diminished, its curse finally broken. Exhausted and relieved, Sarah and I sat in the aftermath, the storm outside abating as dawn broke. The Dybbuk was gone, its rage and torment finally at an end. Yet, as we took stock of what had happened, a chilling thought crept into my mind, a twist of fate that made my skin crawl. As I picked up the mirror, I caught a glimpse of my own reflection, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something else, a face not my own, its eyes burning with a familiar, haunting fire. The Dybbuk's essence had been trapped, but in its final moments, it had left a parting gift, a seed of its malice buried deep within my soul. The box was safe, the spirit contained, but the horror was not over. The Dybbuk had found a new host, a new prison, within me. And as I stared into the mirror, I realized the chilling truth. The curse would continue, a cycle of despair and vengeance that could never be truly broken. And somewhere deep inside, a whisper echoed, a sinister promise of the terror yet to come.